The more you stop searching, the faster you find. I have whispered these words to myself countless times, not as a conclusion, but as a strange truth that revealed itself only when I finally loosened the grip of my own will. If you have ever felt that life hides its most precious answers, precisely when you chase them with desperation, then you already stand at the threshold of this mystery. And if you have ever sensed that the universe sometimes speaks only when you fall silent, then perhaps you too belong, the tribe of the intuitive, the mysterious, the spiritually restless, the ones who see what others overlook. I speak to you now, not as a distant sage, but as a man who spent his life chasing the invisible mechanisms behind all things, the anatomy of thought, the shadow behind the shadow, the breath hidden within the movement of birds. And what I discovered is that the human soul behaves like a skittish animal. Approach it with force and it flees, wait with patience, and it comes to rest beside you. Answers work the same way, meaning works the same way. Even love, purpose, and intuition unfold only in the presence of a certain stillness, as if they were shy forms of light, slipping through a cracked window. Perhaps you already know this feeling. When you search obsessively for clarity, the world becomes cloudy. When you demand certainty, everything tightens. When you insist that life reveal itself on your schedule, it grows silent, almost offended by your insistence. I have lived this tension too. I chased inventions, ideas, visions of the future with such hunger that at times they hid from me like frightened animals. Only when I stopped demanding revelation did revelation finally approach. It is a paradox the mind resists, yet the heart recognizes instantly. You have lived it when a lost memory returned, only after you stopped trying to remember it. When a solution appeared the moment you stepped away from your desk. When love arrived when you no longer begged for it. When your intuition finally spoke after you grew tired of arguing with your own fears. The more you stop searching, the faster you find. It is almost cruel in its elegance, this law of the inner world. To those who are mysterious, intuitive, or spiritual by nature, this paradox is not merely an idea, it is a familiar ache. You see too deeply, and so the world's noise becomes unbearable. You feel too much, and so you retreat into silence. You sense currents under the surface that others ignore, and so you often appear distant, misplaced, out of rhythm with the theater of society. Yet your silence is not emptiness, it is preparation. Your retreat is not weakness, it is calibration. Those who observe life from the shadows often understand it far better than those who stand proudly in the spotlight. And I confess something to you. Sometimes I envied the simple certainty of those who never questioned themselves, who lived as though truth were a trophy to seize rather than a presence to receive. But their certainty was brittle. It cracked the moment life shifted. Meanwhile, those like you, those who feel the subtle tremors beneath the surface, carry a different strength, the ability to wait without collapsing, to listen without demanding, to perceive without forcing. This is the strength that makes finding inevitable. There were nights in my workshop when frustration burned hotter than any flame. I would stare at a blank page, my invention refusing to unfold, as if mocking my impatience. Yet it was in stepping away, in walking through the dim corridors, in watching the moon carve light into the stones, that the idea would suddenly appear, fully formed, as if it had been waiting for me to stop searching long enough for it to approach. I began to realize that intuition is a guest that visits only those who know how to create space for it. If you are listening now, I suspect you too have felt the strange pull towards something unseen, a truth you can sense but cannot chase, a knowing that appears only when you stop strangling it with your expectations. Perhaps life has tried to teach you this through disappointment, through delays, through the quiet dissolving of your plans. These are not punishments, they are invitations. They are the universe closing certain doors, so you finally learn to stand still long enough to see the doorway behind you. And so I offer you this opening thought, one that will guide everything we explore together. What if the answers you seek are not ahead of you, but already circling you, waiting for the moment you stop running? What if the path only becomes visible when your footsteps finally fall silent? What if finding is not an act of pursuit, but an act of surrender? Because the more you stop searching, the faster you find. And those who dare to become quiet enough, mysterious enough, intuitive enough, will always discover what others spend their whole lives chasing in vain. There is a moment, subtle as the hush between two heartbeats, when the world reveals something it had no intention of showing you. It happens only when the mind loosens its desperate grip, when the inner turbulence settles, and when the searching dissolves into something quieter, more spacious. I began to notice this presence when I stopped interrogating life with the impatience of a man who believes he is owed answers. It was then that truth, like a soft glow rising from beneath the surface of water, began to appear on its own terms. I often wondered why the universe hides its wisdom behind this veil of paradox. Why must we stop seeking in order to find? Why must we forget our questions before answers arise? With years of contemplation, I understood that the human mind is shaped like a mirror. When it is shaken, nothing can be reflected clearly. But when it becomes still, even for a moment, the faintest light reveals itself. The intuitive ones among us, those who feel the quietest tremors of existence, know this instinctively. They sense the subtle shifts in the atmosphere of the soul. They perceive the tone of silence as if it were language. They understand that truth is not a mountain to climb, but a mist that settles upon the calm. And yet, this gift is not without its burden. For when you see the world not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is, you begin to notice the illusions that comfort others. You perceive the scaffolding behind their beliefs, the fear beneath their confidence, the longing hidden behind their noise. You see that many search endlessly not because they seek truth, but because they fear what will happen when they stop searching. Stillness terrifies them. Reflection exposes them. But for you, for those who walk through life with a quiet, piercing awareness, stillness is not an enemy. It is a portal. I learned this as an artist long before I understood it as a human being. When I painted, I did not chase the image. I allowed it to emerge. Sad line never appeared when I forced it. It trembled, it broke, it betrayed the essence of the form. But when I breathed, when I let my hand follow the whisper of intuition rather than the roar of intention, the line became alive. It revealed something beyond my planning, something truer than my ambition. Life behaves in the same manner. The moment you release your rigid design, the natural design reveals itself. And what of those who are mysterious? Those who do not flaunt their inner world but guard it like an ancient manuscript. They too follow this hidden law. Their wisdom does not come from collecting answers, but from dissolving the need for them. They walk through the world as if listening to music no one else can hear. Their silence is not emptiness, it is a tuning. Their detachment is not coldness, it is freedom from the noise that enslaves others. They do not hurry, because they know the pace of the soul cannot be rushed. They do not beg for clarity, because clarity arrives as a guest, not a prisoner. Perhaps you have felt this conflict within yourself, the tension between what your spirit knows and what the world demands of you. You are told to chase, to strive, to search relentlessly, to conquer, but something inside you resists this violence. Something ancient whispers that meaning comes not from pursuit, but from presence. And this whisper often places you at odds with the expectations around you. While others sprint toward goals that hollow them out, you pause. While others fill their lives with noise, you listen. While they search externally, you sense something unfolding internally. But this inner sensitivity has its shadows. When you perceive life too deeply, you also perceive your own fears, your own contradictions, your own illusions. And the temptation arises to fix everything, to clarify everything, to force yourself into alignment. You begin to search for a perfect version of yourself that does not exist. You chase an ideal that dissolves as soon as you approach it. I know this torment well, for I spent years battling the vastness within me, trying to pin it down with logic, trying to sculpt it into shape. But the soul is not marble. It is water. Press it too tightly, and it escapes your grasp. And so begins the spiral. You search for yourself but lose yourself in the searching. You chase meaning, but create distance between you and the very meaning you seek. You look for signs, but become blind to the ones arising naturally. This is the suffering of the intuitive, the mysterious, the spiritually awake. They see too much and yet understand too little, not because truth is hidden, but because they cannot stop reaching for it long enough for it to settle. There came a night when I realized the truth was not ahead of me, but already woven into my being. Nothing needed to be found, it only needed to be allowed. This is when searching becomes an obstacle rather than a path. The mind reaches outward while truth blooms inward, and the tragedy is that many will spend their entire lives reaching in the wrong direction. But you, if you are hearing this, are already awakening to the possibility that you have been looking through the wrong lens. You sense that something in you must loosen, soften, surrender. You recognize that the more desperately you chase answers, the more they retreat. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you begin to suspect that the act of finding is not an act of pursuit, but an act of becoming. There came a point in my life when I began to see patterns behind the patterns, movements behind the movements, truths hidden in the folds of ordinary moments. It was as if the world itself were a vast fresco, and every gesture, every silence, every hesitation, every glimmer of intuition was a brushstroke revealing a deeper design. And yet, the more I tried to decipher this grand painting with force, the more its meaning escaped me. It was only when I softened my gaze, when I allowed the image to emerge rather than dissecting it, that the truth began to breathe. This is the burden and the blessing of those who move through life with heightened intuition. You see the invisible scaffolding that others ignore. You sense the subtle turbulence beneath their calm faces, the longing beneath their laughter, the fear wrapped in their certainty. You perceive life as a living organism, fluid, unpredictable, sacred, but such perception comes with a price. When you feel deeply, you cannot numb yourself. When you see clearly, you cannot pretend. And when you sense the hidden currents of life, you cannot join the frantic search that consumes the world. Yet the world insists you must. It demands that you chase every answer, define every unknown, label every emotion, and justify every intuition. It urges you to search even when the searching exhausts you, and so you try. You push your mind beyond its natural rhythm, you tighten your spirit with unnecessary urgency, you dissect your inner world as if it were a mechanical device. But the soul does not respond to pressure. It recoils, it hides. It withholds its wisdom until you remember the ancient law inscribed subtly into the fabric of consciousness. The more you stop searching, the faster you find. I witnessed this truth in my own students, apprentices who approached learning with hunger but also with fear. Fear of not knowing enough, of not being enough. They would grip their tools as if trying to force inspiration through sheer tension, and their lines would tremble, their ideas would falter, their spirit would diminish. Only when they released the need to impress me, only when they allowed themselves to breathe, did their work begin to carry the weight and grace of authenticity. It was as though the muse refused to reveal herself to those who demanded her presence, appearing only to the ones who greeted her with serenity. Life responds the same way. It does not withhold answers out of cruelty, but out of precision. It knows that a truth received too early becomes a burden rather than a blessing. It knows that if you find something before you have the inner stillness to hold it, you will distort it. And so the universe waits, patiently, silently, until your spirit becomes a vessel capable of receiving what you have been chasing. This waiting is often mistaken for emptiness, but it is preparation. It is the soul reshaping itself to match the weight of what is coming. Perhaps you have felt this tension, the desire to move forward, paired with an inexplicable resistance within you. It is not that life is denying you. It is that you are not yet open in the way the truth requires. Searching aggressively tightens the inner muscles, the way a clenched fist cannot hold water. But the moment you release your grip, even slightly understanding flows in. And yet, surrender is the most frightening act for the mind that believes it must control everything. You fear that if you stop searching, nothing will come, that if you stop longing, you will lose what you desire, that if you become still, life will abandon you. But this is an illusion created by a mind conditioned for struggle. In reality, desire becomes visible only when you no longer chase it like prey. Guidance emerges only when you stop drowning in your own noise. Clarity blossoms only when you loosen your expectations enough for the truth to breathe. I learned this in the quiet hours of dawn, when the world still held the softness of dreams. Those were the moments when intuition felt like a companion sitting beside me, pointing not with words but with presence. It would guide my hand, shape my thoughts, rearrange my perception. And I realized that intuition is not a flash of brilliance but a slow illumination, like light crawling across stone as the sun rises. You do not summon it. You make space for it. This is why some people appear mysterious to others. Their silence is not withdrawal, it is devotion. They are attuned to the faint whispers of the soul that can only be heard when the world grows quiet. They do not rush because they have discovered the futility of rushing. They do not search frantically because they have learned that all searching eventually leads back to themselves, and they are not lost. They are listening. But there is a deeper truth hidden beneath this way of being. The mysterious ones suffer in ways the world cannot understand. They sense possibilities that never manifest, futures that dissolve before forming, emotions that do not belong to them. They carry echoes of truths others are not ready to hear, and so they become wanderers, not in the world, but in the space between knowing and not knowing. They carry a wisdom that feels too heavy at times, a sensitivity that can feel like both a gift and a curse. And yet, through all of this, one revelation remains constant. The moment you stop grasping, life places in your hands what you were reaching for all along. The moment you stop insisting, the universe responds. The moment you stop searching, the path unfolds before you, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of alignment. There is a turning point in every inner journey, a moment when the mind, exhausted from its own resistance, finally breaks open. Not like glass shattering in despair, but like a seed cracking in order to release what it was meant to become. I have lived enough years to recognize this moment in myself and in others. It arrives quietly, often after long nights of questioning, after the heart has worn itself out, searching for what refuses to be forced. And then, almost without warning, the truth appears, not as an answer, but as a shift. For me, this shift felt like standing before a painting I had studied endlessly, only to realize that I had been focusing on the wrong part of the canvas. The details I obsessed over were nothing but ornaments. The true meaning lived in the space I had ignored, the negative space, the silence between the lines, the light that shaped the shadows. And I understood something that startled me. The search itself had been blinding me. The very effort to find clarity had become the barrier to clarity. It was then that I recognized the paradox that defines the spiritual path. Seeking is necessary only until you realize that seeking is the very thing keeping you from seeing. You search until the searching becomes unbearable, and then you stop, not out of defeat, but out of awakening. The more you stop searching, the faster you find. Not because the universe changes, but because you do. You become transparent, receptive, spacious enough to perceive what was always present. This realization struck me with both liberation and sorrow. Liberation, because I finally understood the nature of truth. Sorrow, because I saw how many souls spend their entire lives chasing what would come to them naturally if only they softened. I watched people run through life as if they feared being overtaken by their own emptiness. They filled their days with noise, their minds with clutter, their hearts with frantic longing, never suspecting that the silence they avoided was the doorway they needed. And yet, I do not blame them. The world trains us to strive, not to receive, to conquer, not to surrender, to chase certainty, not to become still enough for certainty to arise. But the intuitive, the spiritually sensitive, the mysterious ones, they feel the fracture in this way of living. They sense the unnaturalness of it. They feel an ache that others dismiss. They know that something sacred lives beneath the surface of things, waiting for attention, not aggression. But even they, even you, fall into the trap of searching too violently at times. You seek purpose with clenched teeth. You chase intuition with panic. You look for signs with desperation, and you forget that nothing luminous can be caught this way. Light does not respond to force. It responds to openness. The soul unfolds only when given space. The deeper truths of life emerge only when pressure dissolves. There was a moment I remember with the clarity of a well-defined contour, when I realized that my constant striving had been a subtle form of distrust. I had believed that if I stopped searching, life would abandon me. But life is not a negligent teacher, it is an artist. It reveals its colors only when the canvas of your being is ready. It withholds not to punish you, but to protect the unfolding. This is the turning point, the moment you understand that your effort was never the key. It was always your alignment, your ability to become still, to absorb, to sense rather than demand. You do not find truth by chasing it. You find it by becoming someone who can hold it without distortion. This is why the answers arrive the moment you stop insisting. This is why intuition speaks when the noise inside you finally quiets. This is why clarity appears in the pauses, not in the pursuit. And with this understanding comes a new kind of strength, not the strength of force, but the strength of surrender. This is the strength of a tree rooted deeply enough to withstand storms without straining. the strength of a river that flows effortlessly around obstacles without losing its essence, the strength of light that illuminates simply by existing. When you embody this kind of strength, life no longer feels like a battlefield. It becomes a dialogue. This shift transformed my relationship with myself. I no longer tried to sculpt my soul like marble, imposing rigid ideals upon it. I treated it instead like a living form of clay, one shaped not by force, but by presence. And as I softened internally, life softened in response. Insights arrived unannounced, guidance emerged without effort, paths revealed themselves by simply being walked. You must understand, nothing changed externally. The world remained chaotic, unpredictable, full of illusions and contradictions. But I was no longer searching with the desperation of someone afraid of being lost. I had learned to listen instead of grasp, to perceive instead of force, to wait instead of chase. And in this new posture of being, everything I had once strained to find began appearing with startling ease. This is the quiet revolution of the inner world, the moment when your searching collapses into knowing, when your striving dissolves into receiving, when you become porous enough for truth to enter. And once this happens, you can never return to the way you lived before. The illusion of control loses its charm. The noise of society becomes easier to ignore. The mystery of existence becomes a companion rather than a threat. And you begin to realize that you were never meant to search endlessly. You were meant to become someone who can see. When I finally understood that finding was never about pursuing, but about allowing, my life began to move with a different rhythm. It was as though a veil had been lifted from the world, revealing its textures, its subtle invitations, its hidden architecture. I no longer felt the frantic need to chase meaning across the landscape of my days. Meaning approached me instead. It rose like dawn, quietly, inevitably, without being summoned. And I realized that the soul's greatest transformations do not happen through conquest, but through the gentle dissolving of resistance. You may not see it in yourself yet, but you have already begun this dissolving. Something in you is softening, loosening its grip, giving up the exhausting habit of forcing life to obey your timelines. And though this surrender may feel like vulnerability, it is in truth your greatest source of power. For when you stop searching with desperation, you create a space within you, a vast interior chamber, where intuition can finally speak. And it speaks not in thunder, but in the faint glow of understanding that spreads slowly through your being, like fire traveling through silk. Those who are mysterious, intuitive, or spiritually awake know this glow well. They can sense when a truth is approaching long before it arrives. They feel the shift in the inner air, the tremor beneath the surface of a thought, the subtle pull of something unseen, yet undeniably real. This sensitivity often isolates them, for the world worships noise and dismisses subtlety. But what the world calls weakness is in fact a rare perceptiveness. The mysterious ones navigate life not through logic alone, but through the fluid intelligence of the heart. They feel existence the way an artist feels light on a canvas, intuitively, wordlessly, wholly. But to live this way requires immense courage. For when you sense deeply, you also suffer deeply. You see your own illusions with painful clarity. You feel the contradictions of the world like fractures in your own chest. You notice how often people search for answers that would appear naturally, if only they trusted silence. You watch them exhaust themselves chasing certainty in places where certainty cannot live, and sometimes you try to guide them, but truth cannot be forced into a mind that is still at war with itself. I learned this the hard way. I tried to awaken minds that were not ready to be awakened. I tried to offer insights to those who demanded proof rather than presence, and I discovered that wisdom delivered too early becomes a burden, not a gift. So I stepped back. I allowed people to walk their own labyrinth, knowing they would eventually arrive at the same revelation that had transformed me, that searching is often a disguised form of fear, and that finding requires not effort, but intimacy with oneself. Over time, I began to see that life does not withhold answers. It withholds them only until you are capable of receiving them without distortion. Clarity is not something given. It is something permitted. And the moment you stop strangling your path with expectations, life rushes in like air into a vacuum. Guidance flows where resistance once lived. Insight rises where noise once dominated. Purpose emerges from the quiet, like a figure stepping out of the fog. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to trust life, not blindly, not passively, but intelligently. You recognize that the universe is not chaotic, but exquisitely precise, that every delay was a preparation, that every unanswered question protected you from premature certainty, that every moment of confusion was carving space within you for a deeper understanding. And in this trust, you stop trying to control everything. You stop interrogating your own intuition. You stop demanding guarantees from a world that was never meant to be predictable. Instead, you move with life as you would move with a partner in a delicate dance. You sense its direction rather than dictating it. You respond rather than react. You allow rather than force. And in this way, life becomes less of a puzzle and more of a companion, one that whispers guidance the moment you become quiet enough to hear it. It is in this state that finding becomes effortless. Answers come not as lightning but as dawn. Insights no longer arrive through struggle but through resonance. You begin to notice that the things you once chased now appear with a strange and graceful timing, as if they had been circling you for years, waiting for you to finally stand still long enough for them to approach. And so the promise remains true, not as a poetic phrase, but as a law woven into the fabric of existence. The more you stop searching, the faster you find. Not because you have given up, but because you have grown into someone who no longer obstructs their own clarity. Finding becomes your natural state. Alignment becomes your quiet foundation, and the mystery of life turns from an adversary into an ally. In the end, everything you seek is already leaning toward you, like a flower bending toward light. It has always been this way, and the moment you stop pushing against the world reveals that it was never resisting you. It was waiting for you to open. If you listen carefully, you may feel it even now, that gentle pull, that soft glow, that whisper rising from within. It is not coming from the future. It is coming from the depths of your own being. And it has been waiting, patiently, for you to stop searching long enough to finally be found.